This is BBC World News America. Reporting from Washington, I'm Rajini Vaidyanathan. American pastor Andrew Brunson's released from detention in Turkey and is headed back to the US, ending a major row between the two countries. South Korea's president tells the BBC he believes peace will be declared on the Korean peninsula, but admits there may still be bumps getting Kim Jong-un to disarm. And the wedding bells are ringing again in Windsor. This time it was Princess Eugenie and her groom, who the British royal family came out to celebrate. Welcome to our viewers on public television in the US and around the globe. An American pastor whose case was taken up by the White House has been freed by a court in Turkey, despite being convicted on terrorism charges. Andrew Brunson was at the centre of a diplomatic showdown between Turkey and the US, which created a major rift and economic turmoil. He's now free after 2 years in detention. Speaking a short time ago, President Trump welcomed the pastor's release.
So we have good news. Pastor Andrew Brunson is in the air from Turkey. He's, I think, in good shape. He'll be stopping most likely in Germany for a full checkup. And then he's going to be coming to the Oval Office, most likely on Saturday. But we're very honored to have him back with us. He suffered greatly, but we're very appreciative to a lot of people.
Mr. Trump went on to say that no deal had been made to secure Pastor Brunson's release. For more on these developments, Mark Lowen reports from Istanbul.
Well, the detention of Pastor Brunson had been the source of an unprecedented crisis between the US and Turkey. Donald Trump lost patience with Turkey's continued detention of Andrew Brunson and over the summer applied sanctions to 2 Turkish ministers and hiked tariffs on Turkish aluminium and steel. Ankara responded in kind. Relations between these 2 NATO allies reached an unprecedented low, and with it, the Turkish currency, the lira, which lost some 40% of its value against the US dollar. So clearly, economic and political pressure on Turkey meant that this country had to release Andrew Brunson in the end, even though President Erdogan had always maintained that Turkey has an independent judiciary and he could not interfere with the court's decision. There were long reports of negotiations between the 2 governments and reports of a deal struck between Ankara and Washington in which Pastor Brunson would go free. So he has now been released. He was given a 3-year, 1-month, 15-day sentence, which was basically covered by the 2 years he's already spent in custody. So he is on his way back to the US, where he will be, I'm sure, warmly welcomed by Donald Trump, who has already tweeted his support and happiness that Pastor Brunson has been freed. And now I think what Turkey will want is that sanctions and the threat of future sanctions would be lifted, a normalization of relations between Turkey and the US. But what I think this has shown really once again is that Turkey's judiciary is anything but independent.
Mark Lowen reporting from Istanbul there. Well, as one diplomatic row resolves itself, another is only heating up. A delegation from Saudi Arabia has arrived in Istanbul as part of a joint investigation into the disappearance of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Turkish officials say he was most likely killed after entering the Saudi consulate, but Riyadh denies the allegations. A brief while ago, I spoke with John Alterman, who directs the Middle East programme at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies. John Alterman, thanks for coming in. The Turkish government now says it has new material evidence which proves that the Saudis killed Mr. Khashoggi. How does this new evidence change things?
Well, it depends what the evidence is, and it depends who they're willing to share it with. The Saudis, in their own press, to the extent they talk about it, and they don't talk about it a lot, say this is just another Turkish plot against Saudi Arabia. It has to do with the battle for the Muslim Brotherhood and the control of the Middle East. But there seems to be something there, and the Saudi explanations haven't really been able to contradict the basic narrative.
How does this affect what's going on between the US and Saudi Arabia? Because there's more pressure now for President Trump to be more condemning in his language.
There is an American need to understand what happened. And I think one of the things we've heard from a lot of senior American officials is we have to understand, we have to get to the bottom of this quickly. There have been several years when a lot of people in the U.S. government have said, we need Mohammed bin Salman to succeed. We need the crown prince to be successful because he needs to be the agent of change in Saudi Arabia. I think a lot of those people are wondering whether Mohammed bin Salman can be that agent of change. There are certainly ways that this could unfold where people would say that doesn't really impugn the crown prince. There are also ways it could unfold that would impugn the crown prince. We have to see how this develops.
You mentioned the crown prince. How do you think this is all playing out for him back home?
As I said, in the press in Saudi Arabia, there's not a lot about this. But one of his great accomplishments in his time in government is he seemed to be healing the rift between the United States and Saudi Arabia. There was a real concern that partly because the United States was rebalancing toward Asia, and partly because the United States had discovered so much oil and gas within the United States that the U.S. was willing to walk away from Saudi Arabia. And for Saudis who for 70 years built their whole security concept around being close to the United States, that was very threatening.
And one of the issues here in the United States is, of course, the business ties between the two countries. We've already seen in other countries like Richard Branson saying that he's not going to be putting money into Saudi Arabia. How do you think this leaves the economic relationship?
I think there are still a lot of people who see a lot of interest in Saudi Arabia, a lot of people who want to attract investment from Saudi Arabia, a lot of people want to invest in Saudi Arabia. That's not going away. But to the extent that people say, I need a predictable environment, I need to understand that there's going to be rule of law. If it turns out the Saudis at the highest level were deeply involved in an extrajudicial killing of a critic, that doesn't embolden you that this is going to be an environment where there's protection of rule of law.
John Alterman, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at some of the day's other news. Pope Francis has accepted the resignation of Cardinal Donald Wuerl, the Archbishop of Washington. He's been accused of mishandling allegations of sexual abuse by Roman Catholic clergy while he was a bishop in Pennsylvania. Cardinal Wuerl will reportedly retain his title and continue in his role until a successor is found. Department store Sears is reportedly planning to close up to 150 of its shops as part of a plan to restructure under bankruptcy protection. The retailer, which has been going for 125 years, was once the largest in America. It currently has around 700 stores and roughly 90,000 employees. And the woman who bought a Banksy painting for more than $1.2 million will keep the artwork despite its self-destructing after it sold at auction. The woman, who doesn't want to be named, said she was shocked but realised she ended up with a piece of art history. The piece has been given a new name: Love in the Bin. Now, the president of South Korea has told the BBC that it's only a matter of time before Washington and Pyongyang declare an end to the 68-year war on the Korean peninsula. Moon Jae-in also said there could be more diplomatic bumps and bruises along the way as he tries to persuade Kim Jong-un to give up his nuclear weapons. But he described his counterpart as a young leader with a clear vision. Laura Becker reports from Seoul.
These rare dogs are a special gift from Kim Jong-un to President Moon. A symbol of a developing relationship between two leaders who technically still at war.
I got them as a present from Chairman Kim during my trip to Pyongyang. They are actually designated as national treasures in North Korea.
150,000 North Koreans were introduced to the South Korean president in Pyongyang. Mr. Moon has spent decades pushing for peace. He didn't waste this chance to speak.
I was actually quite nervous to give the speech. Chairman Kim had no string attached when he gave me the opportunity. He never asked me to say certain things. He didn't even want to know what I was going to say before the speech. I believe this demonstrates the changes that are happening in North Korea right now.
Kim Jong-un is expected to come to Seoul by the end of this year, the first trip by a North Korean leader to the South Korean capital. You've now met Kim Jong-un 3 times. What's he like?
He is young, but he has a clear vision to develop his poor country. And he is also quite courteous and candid, and he respects his elders. So, I would say he demonstrates humble leadership.
President Moon told me he believes North Korea will start dismantling some of its nuclear facilities if the US also takes steps. The hope from both Koreas is that Donald Trump will agree to declare the war on this peninsula is officially over.
I believe there is a shared understanding between Washington and Seoul regarding this viewpoint. So I believe it is only a matter of time, a matter of date, and we will be able to sign this declaration.
Mr. Moon travels to Europe this week to ask for their support. He admits this will be a long process, with more bumps and bruises along the way. As the son of North Korean refugees, is this more personal or political for you?
I feel more than anyone the pain of war and the tragedy of war and the pain of separation. And this is why I resolved to never see war again on the Korean Peninsula, and also to overcome the pain of conflict. So these are my main political objectives.
From humble beginnings, President Moon is trying to negotiate with two of the world's most unpredictable leaders. He's an optimist, but some fear he may not be a realist. Laura Bicker, BBC News, Seoul.
Next, rescue teams in Florida are continuing to look for people trapped or killed by Hurricane Michael. So far, the death toll stands at 12, with 5 people losing their lives in Virginia after floodwaters rose quickly. Many communities have been hard hit by the disaster, and as you're about to see, people there are still assessing the damage. This is home now, after Michael came and left. The hurricane destroyed thousands of homes, including where 4-year-old Armani lives.
Well, my clothes are in there, in the dresser, but they're all messed up.
Many parts of Florida's panhandle lie in ruin. These pictures show the impact before and after in Mexico Beach, where the hurricane's been described as the mother of all bombs.
What we're standing in right now is what Katrina did to New Orleans, especially the lower 9th Ward.
More than 1 million homes across the region were left without power. Thousands of people were forced to seek temporary shelter, and authorities say the cleanup could go on for months.
It takes time to put these things back together and help, communities strive for a new normal, but we are doing everything that we possibly can to move as quick as we can.
And that includes reaching residents who've been left stranded. In this rescue operation, people were airlifted to safety from Panama City Beach. The force of Hurricane Michael was felt well beyond Florida. These images show the damage left in Georgia and Alabama. And further north in Virginia, floods caused by the storms have claimed 5 lives and left residents in shock.
Some of the people that live back here, they're devastated. I mean, that's just where their home is.
This was one of the worst storms in American history. As rescue efforts continue, the full impact of Hurricane Michael is still unknown. And President Trump's announced he'll be travelling to Florida and Georgia to see some of the regions worst affected. You're watching BBC World News America. Still to come on tonight's programme. Everything is bigger in Texas, including the politics. One Senate candidate's just shattered a fundraising record.
Since its inception in 1961, the Kuwait Fund has been supporting people's livelihoods in over 100 countries by funding projects in an array of sectors, ranging from infrastructure to health and education. These initiatives ultimately help to eradicate poverty and promote sustainable development.
It's heartbreaking and it scares me because I want to be able to bring her home.
Our World is a unique series of films on the BBC, offering personal insights into global events.
هاي النتائج نحن اللي حققناها مو إنجاز إعجاز.
Our World, stories that speak for themselves.
Take away the noise.
The fury.
The fighting voices. The distortions. Cosmetics. color and the flashy effects. But most of all,
you can take away the lies,
the slander,
the misrepresentation
that seeks to pull us apart. And then?
Then you can find out
what's actually happening.
And when you find that,
then you'll find
BBC News.
Americans have become used to politics being a big bucks affair, but today one number really stood out. The Texas Senate race has gained national attention, with the Republican incumbent Ted Cruz facing Democratic challenger Beto O'Rourke. But now we've learnt that O'Rourke raised, wait for it, more than $38 million in the third quarter alone, shattering the previous record. Well, for more on the massive haul, and with just 25 days to go until the midterm elections, I spoke a brief while ago with Josh Krausar, politics editor at the National Journal. It's been quite a week. Let's start with this $38 million. Can Beto O'Rourke convert dollars into votes?
Ultimately, message means a whole lot more than money. And while it's very impressive, I mean, that amount of money is more than Barack Obama raised in a quarter when he was running for president in 2008. But ultimately, there's only so much advantage you get by getting into that 30 million plus territory. And the problem Beto O'Rourke has is that there's only so many Democratic liberal voters in Texas, and you have a conservative majority there. So when you look at the polling and you look at the Republican base, which is starting to come out for Senator Ted Cruz, O'Rourke's hitting 45%. Can he get to 50%? It's going to be awfully difficult.
How does someone raise that much money?
Well, there is a very big liberal donor base across the country, even in Texas, Austin, the big cities. Suburban Texas is turning more towards the Democratic Party these days, and there are a lot of opportunities for Democrats to pick up House seats in Texas. But the problem is there are a whole lot of conservative voters in the country, in small towns, and frankly, one of the challenges O'Rourke has is he hasn't engaged the Hispanic voters. He hasn't been able to perform quite as well with Hispanic voters as he could be doing, and that money is coming from a lot of white liberals, but he hasn't been able to build the big coalition that's necessary to win a state like Texas.
We talk a lot about money in American politics. How is he getting these donations? Are they from big interests, or are they from small donations that have all added up?
It's a combination of the two, but there's a group called Act Blue, which is it's been around for a while, but it's a liberal clearinghouse for small dollar donations. And Beto O'Rourke is getting a lot of excitement. People are reading about him in the news. They like his authenticity. They like the fact he means what he says. He's running a very positive campaign. So he's getting national attention, and national money is going into Texas. The problem is money isn't the only thing that wins statewide campaigns.
And we're talking about 25 days or so to the midterms. We've got the president out on the campaign trail in force again this weekend. I think he's going to Ohio and Kentucky. How effective are these campaign rallies that he's holding?
They're effective at rallying the Republican base. That doesn't help Republicans a whole lot in the House. There are a lot of suburban districts that the president is staying far away from. But the Senate, the map in the Senate, features a whole lot of states that Trump is still very popular in. And Trump is going to a lot of those Senate battlegrounds, a lot of districts that are much more conservative. And he thinks if he can rally his base, if the fight over Judge Kavanaugh is a really polarizing moment that favors the Republicans, that Republicans can hang on to some seats in more conservative turf.
So this all comes down to turnout. What do you think the direction of this midterm elections is going to go so far? When we look at all these polls,
it's a base versus base election. The House is looking very, very favorable for Democrats. It's looking likely that they'll get the 24 seats they need and more to flip the House. Nancy Pelosi perhaps becomes Speaker. The Senate, though, Republicans are moving in a favorable direction. And it's looking right now that some of these red states that Democrats hold are moving the GOP's direction. Republicans may end up gaining a couple seats when all is said and done.
You talk about base versus base, but what about those undecided soccer mum voters who are perhaps still sitting on the fence?
Independent voters are definitely leaning towards the Democrats, but it is those suburban women. It is the districts in the country that are affluent near big metropolitan areas. Many of them were once held by Republicans. Republicans hold a lot of these seats, but these are the types of districts that are going to move to the Democratic direction next year.
And what sort of message will they be looking for then?
Well, they are looking for, it's about tone. I mean, these districts do not like President Trump's character. They don't like his message. They may agree with him on some of the policies, on fiscal policy, for instance, on tax policy. But when it comes to the message he sends, when it comes to his tone, they're turned off.
25 days to go. So much more politics in that time. Thanks for coming in, Josh.
Thanks for having me.
Now, the world's longest commercial flights arrived in New York from Singapore. The journey covered more than 15,000 kilometres, or about 9,300 miles. Passengers were indeed settled in for the long haul. The flight lasted nearly 18 hours. Singapore Airlines relaunched the service after cutting it a few years ago due to cost concerns. Katie Silver reports.
Just after 10:30 at night in Singapore, flight SQ22 departed the island state's Changi airport with 150 passengers on board. To get to the US East Coast, it had to cross a dozen time zones, flying over the Philippines, past Japan, across the North Pacific Ocean, and then the entire US before touching down at Newark Airport outside New York. So who gets a flight like this? Well, it's the groupies.
I fly for fun. I have a passion for the aviation, and I'm an aviation enthusiast. And I'm part of this group, which is called First to Fly.
I did the turnaround on the first A380 to New York as well. So that was, I think, about 5 or 6 years ago, and I think it's okay, it's the experience.
At 15,341 kilometres, it's the world's longest non-stop flight. Second on the list is Qatar Airways with its Auckland-Doha service. This takes 18 hours to complete and travels about 14,500 kilometres in distance. And third is Australian airline Qantas with its Perth to London flight. This travels a similar distance and takes 17 hours and 20 minutes to reach its destination. The flight has run before for almost 10 years, but they stopped it because they couldn't make ends meet.
They were using a bit of a gas guzzler, an Airbus A340-500. They believe that with these new, modern, more efficient aircraft, that this will prove to be a viable flight.
This time round, they're targeting the top end of the market, only offering business and premium economy seats, hoping to cater to the high-end traveller needing to commute between two of the world's major financial hubs. Katie Silver, BBC News.
Now, it's been quite a year for royal weddings, and today it was Princess Eugenie who walked down the aisle in Windsor. Eugenie, the 9th in line to the throne, is the daughter of Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson. Both were on hand at the wedding, of course, along with the Queen and 850 guests in St George's Chapel. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell reports.
Hold on to your hats, it's another royal wedding, though not quite in the same league as Harry and Meghan's. Today, 5 months after their big day, the Sussexes slipped into St George's Chapel through a side door. By contrast, the mother of the bride made an exuberant entrance outside the chapel. There are those within the royal family who can't forget the embarrassments the Duchess of York has caused over the years. But this was the Yorks' day, and the Duchess was making the most of it. The Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh took their places in the chapel just behind the Duchess of York. The first time it's thought that the Duke has been in such close proximity to his erstwhile daughter-in-law for 26 years. The bride, Princess Eugenie, arrived with her father, the Duke of York. Waiting inside the chapel, the groom, Jack Brooksbank, a drinks company manager. The bride joined him at the altar, where they exchanged their vows.
I, Eugenie Victoria Helena.
I, Eugenie Victoria Helena.
Take thee, Jack Christopher Stamp.
Take thee, Jack Christopher Stamp.
To my wedded husband.
To my wedded husband.
On the steps of the chapel, there was a kiss. And then a carriage ride through Windsor. Concerns have been expressed about the cost of security. In the event, it was a much smaller occasion than the Sussexes' wedding, with a shorter route and crowds which were respectable rather than large. Will that have mattered to the couple at the centre of it all? One assumes not. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
Congratulations to the newlyweds. And of course, if you want to see more of the pictures from that royal wedding in Windsor, you can go to the BBC website where we have full and further coverage. Well, that's it for BBC World News America. You can find me on Twitter at BBC Rajini V. Thanks very much for watching us. Have a wonderful weekend.